star one.
Thank you.
All right, this is Phil Quaren with Jeff Wyron, and we're here to talk about some of the ancillary forms that OREF has relating to the various sale agreements. We've got an incredible inventory of forms. I think it's something like 66 or more, and yet I think the percentage of forms that actually get used are far less. So we're going to try to initiate some of those forms today and discuss them. One of the things that I want to bring to everybody's attention is a form known as 000. And that form is actually not a form transactionally speaking, but it's the OREF forms library. And it goes through all of the forms, identifying them, and then also the forms numbers. And if you don't have it or aren't familiar with it, we strongly recommend that you do, because it's a very useful source to check in the event that you've got a transaction and you're wondering whether or not there's some aspect of that transaction that might be better addressed through a form than rather you having to draft something. And I think what we're going to do, if we can, is have the Q&A after the discussion of each sale agreement form. I noticed after going through all the forms and related to the sale agreements that there's a lot of forms out there that aren't directly called up by the sale agreement or the sale agreements, and yet they're important aspects of your real estate transactional business. And we're going to touch on some of those forms as well. But to start, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the sale agreement, and this is the residential sale agreement. And lest this is too obvious, I want to make sure that people understand that the residential sale agreement is primarily intended for single-family homes, that if it's a condominium, for example, you use a condominium sale agreement. And if it's a home, a single-family home, but located in a planned unit development, you may want to also then add the planned unit development addendum, because the PUD means that it has common areas and it has homeowner associations, and there's all sorts of governance issues that arise in that situation. So the last thing I want to say is that many of the addenda that we're going to be talking about in the residential sale agreement are repeated elsewhere in all of the other sale agreements. With two exceptions, I think all of the forms do not have, none of the forms other than the residential real estate sale agreement have special addenda except the new construction form, and we'll be talking about that. And then also, I believe the commercial real estate sale agreement has some specific addenda. But other than that, most of them are repeated from the residential sale agreement. So with that, let's get started and march through the sale agreement and some of the related forms. I'm looking, and you don't have the sale agreements with you, but I'm going to be referring to them generally, not necessarily by numbers or anything, but calling out various forms that are found or referred to in the sale agreement. The first one is OREF 057. OREF 057. And what that is a termination agreement. And as simple as it might sound, the termination agreement is an important document, and it is best to use as a form for a couple different reasons. And one is that it specifically deals with the unequivocal termination of the agreement, and also I want to caution folks not to use the termination agreement if the intent is to exercise the 5 business day right of revocation under the seller property disclosure. Okay, so 057 is the form to be used when the transaction itself is being terminated. And it requires, of course, a mutual termination. It's a pretty good form because it also addresses the issue of disposition of the earnest money that's presumably being held by escrow. The next form is 002. And in looking at this, I realize that we don't actually call it out, but it's a simple little form, and it's the additional provisions form. The additional provisions form, 002. And the one clarification or caveat that we want to say here has to do with the drafting of language itself. That is to say, it's our experience that this addendum, since it's just blank, is often used to describe certain situations, clauses, provisions, and so on. And I think the only thing that we want to say here is that don't use the addendum if there is another form that would suffice. A good example, of course, would be a contingent right of purchase, where the buyer is purchasing the property, but it's contingent upon the sale and closing of the buyer's home. If that's the case, for example, you don't want to use an addendum. And the risk that realtors have, and they're perfectly entitled to draft these addenda, and they're perfectly entitled to, even though it deals with legal issues and so on, it's not the unlawful practice of law or something like that. It's not that kind of a risk. The greatest risk is creating ambiguity in the addendum itself. That is to say, drafting it in such a manner that it's ambiguous. So a rule of thumb that I often mention is the definition of ambiguity, and it is when reasonable minds can differ about the meaning of the clause. So if you have a clause and you and the reader cannot agree on what it means, you've got ambiguity. So a good practice is to make sure that, number one, that the provision is relatively short, and certainly that it's understandable. So that's 002. And Jeff, do you have anything to say about the addenda? I see it used oftentimes as a counteroffer and all sorts of things. Do you see that?
Yeah, I find two situations with the addendum that I think are worth talking about. And first, we've had a couple of questions about whether we can put the forms on the screen. We're going to leave what you see on the screen as you see it with our presentation here. But I would encourage you to log into ZipForms, and you can pull the library while we're going through it and pull those forms as we're talking about them. So for those of you that have that question, please just log into your ZipForms account and pull up the forms as we're reviewing them. But the addendum, what I see happen most commonly is people will use it when they should use like a termination agreement, or they should use a contingent right to purchase agreement. They'll use a blank addendum where there is a form already created for that specific purpose. And yet you have to keep in mind that we've created those forms for that specific purpose through a lot of vetting and for a very specific reason. Your forms committee over the last several years has tried to account for all of the circumstances that could come into play when you terminate a transaction, or when you sell a home, buy a home contingent upon the sale of another home. All of those things have been vetted, and that's why those forms are in existence. So, I would encourage you to use those documents rather than just try and make it up on the fly and put it on a blank addendum. The other thing that I see is this. People regularly ask for us to increase the size of the sale agreement or create extra space that's fillable within the sale agreement on the additional provisions section. And I would just say, we're hesitant to do that because we don't want to arbitrarily increase the length of the sale agreement just to create extra space that not everybody may need. But in addition to that, you've got the addendum for that purpose. So in the additional provisions section, if you're finding that you don't have room for everything you need, use a blank addendum and add it there. That's why it's worded the way that it's worded, see addendum, whatever, at the end of that. And I'd encourage you to do that rather than try and abbreviate and cram everything down in to fit in that section. Just use the addendum. It's okay to use that for that purpose. That's why it's there.
Good point. Okay, the continuing on the sale agreement, under the seller carried financing section of the sale agreement, We had a fair amount of text in the past in regards to that, but we didn't have any forms. And at the request of OER, while we did develop a series of seller-carried forms, and they start with 033, and I think consecutively after that they continue, and I think we have at least 5 forms. We have an advisory, a seller-carried advisory that is just informational, provided to the parties so that they understand the nature of that transaction. Seller-carried meaning that there is no third-party financing, institutional or otherwise. And then, so there's an advisory. There's also an addendum, and that addendum is exceedingly important for folks involved in seller-carried transactions. I could spend the balance of the time here talking about the nuances, but the bottom line is that due to certain federal regulations, there are licensing requirements, MLO, mortgage loan originator licensing requirements that apply even to individual sellers. And so the addendum that has been created, the seller-carried addendum, attempts to vet this issue such that the seller is making representations in the addendum, which is an addendum to the sale agreement. It's not a separate freestanding sale agreement. And the seller is making representations regarding the seller's own history of seller-carried transactions and regarding the nature of the property itself. And if the boxes are appropriately checked by the seller to those questions, then the upshot of all of it is that the seller is good to go and can proceed with the transaction without having to employ a mortgage loan originator. And I suppose this is a good point, a good time to mention it, although I don't think it's a form. It has a form number, and that's the decision tree. There's a decision tree that ORF has developed that allows realtors to, and it's just a little flow chart, single page, to ascertain whether or not the seller is free to go forward without having to employ a mortgage loan originator. So make a note of that. It's on the ORF website, and I unfortunately can't tell you exactly where, but it's a decision tree, and it's for seller-carried transactions, and it's a very good form. And then after the addendum itself, then the next step on the seller-carried transaction is how the security instruments, whether or not, which security instruments will be used, whether or not it's going to be a land sale contract or a contract of sale, same thing, or whether or not it's going to be a note in a trust deed. I'm not going to get into the distinctions right now, but the bottom line is that it's important that the seller has the opportunity to select which form of financing agreement that they're going to be taking back. And in various parts of the state, I'm aware that lawyers have certain preferences for a land sale contract or a note and trust deed. So that's an important issue and not something that the realtors themselves should be recommending. But the use of those forms is generally customary, whether or not it's a note and a trust deed or whether or not it's a land sale contract. Depends in large part on the area of Oregon that the transaction's being conducted. Okay, that's seller carried, and we've got, as I say, about 5 forms. And then the next form, you have anything?
Yeah, if I can jump in real quick, I just want to answer a few of these that are logistical questions. So yes, what you're seeing on the screen is what you're going to see on the screen. We'll scroll through this presentation as we go through it, but if you want to see the forms, you need to go to your ZipLogix, your ZipForms Plus login. For that decision tree that Phil was referring to on the seller carry suite of forms, if you go to www.orefonline.com, you'll be able to find the decision tree available on that site. So if you'd like to take a look at that, and I wouldn't encourage you to do that now, you can do that at any time, but for the actual forms, just go to your ZipLogix library and you can pull those as Phil's reading the number through. Okay, so I hope that answers your questions on that.
Good. Good. Okay. The next form is, let's see, it's 046, And 046 is the form. It's a wood stove fireplace insert addendum 046. And for those of you that are interested in the actual statutes, this relates to ORS 468A dot 460 through 468A dot 515. This has to do with the requirement that sellers of residential structures are required to remove and destroy uncertified solid fuel burning devices such as wood stoves and fireplace inserts and so on. And this form explains the law and identifies whether or not the seller or the buyer will be responsible. Unless the buyer agrees to remove it, unless the buyer agrees to remove the wood stove, uncertified wood stove, within 30 days after closing, it defaults automatically to the seller. In fact, I think the statute actually starts out by saying the seller shall do this. And then there's some language that gives the buyer the opportunity to take over that responsibility and commit to removing it within 30 days. And all of that is contained in the form itself. It's important, again, that the form be used because it clarifies who's going to be responsible. It clarifies the responsibilities of the parties and the seller's duty to not only remove it but to dispose of it. And all of this is set forth in the wood stove fireplace insert addendum 046. Okay.
Yeah, I would add to that most of you know that if it's a financed transaction, the seller's going to need to remove the wood stove. It's going to be an appraisal condition, and if it's a non-certified device, it's going to have to be taken out. The buyer's not going to be given the option necessarily of doing that. But it's the wood burning, wood stove / fireplace addendum, and that title is going to be changing in the 2016 library to the wood stove / wood burning fireplace addendum to clarify that we're talking about a wood burning appliance, not a gas fireplace insert. So you'll see that change in the 2016 year. And we will, in addition to the form number, we'll announce the name of the document for you so you know what we're referencing as well moving forward.
Okay. Form 082, that's a private well addendum. And of course, that's to be used when the property has one or more private wells on it. The sale agreement used to contain all of the text in regards to wells in the body of the document itself. And now that has been changed. So it's just a 2-line entry in the sale agreement. And essentially it asks whether or not there is a well for potable water, and if so, then to use 082, the private well addendum. And so that's available also. The addendum, again, it covers things that oftentimes, at least some realtors, if they're not terribly familiar with this area, it addresses well logs and well reports, flow tests, and so on. So it's a good form. And obviously, if you haven't ever been involved in a transaction concerning a well, it's important to make sure that you know what you're doing. And I think besides working with somebody that does, the next step is to use the appropriate form. And the addendum clarifies that the buyer has an absolute right of termination, in the event that they reject the well reports, the water reports, and so on. As to the quality or quantity of the water. Jeff, do you have anything to add on that?
No, it's a good document, and I would encourage you to use it. Part of the reason that we took the language that was out in the sale agreement out of the sale agreement and put it in its own addendum is because there are some very specific contingencies and details that need to be accounted for if the property has a well. And they weren't fully accounted for with the language that was in the sale agreement, and what we were finding was that a lot of people weren't using an extra addendum. They were just relying on the language that was in the sale agreement itself. So I encourage your use of that form if you're selling property that has a well for residential use or intended for residential use. You really need to use that document.
There was a change, I think, in probably last year a change in the form. The well water addendum used to say that if the buyer rejected the reports, that the seller and the buyer would have a certain period of time within which, or excuse me, I think it said the seller had an opportunity to try to remedy whatever the defect was, and if it was remedied, why then the transaction moved forward. The folks from Southern Oregon and elsewhere felt that that was not good enough, and that regardless of what the seller is willing to do, that the right of termination should belong exclusively to the buyer. And so that's the way the addendum now reads. And so the buyer can essentially opt out if they don't like the reports, much like the seller property or the professional inspection opt-out.
Yeah.
Okay. The next form is that I want to talk about is, let's see here, the professional inspection addendum. Well, let's talk about 064 first. I'm looking at the professional inspection section of the sale agreement, and that section, as everybody knows, is built into the body of the sale agreement. It's not a separate addendum. There is a separate addendum called professional inspection addendum, and that's 058. And we'll be talking about both of those in a second, but I want to make sure that the distinction's understood, that in the body of the sale agreement, there is an inspection contingency protocol, and depending on whether or not the 10 business day right of revocation or during the inspection contingency period applies, or if a longer time applies, the buyer can get out if they don't like the reports, or for some reason cannot, with the seller, reach agreement on seller repairs. And the text of this provision is quite clear that it's got to be an unconditional disapproval, the notice of unconditional disapproval, and that's what 064 is. And for those of you that are unclear on what a conditional versus unconditional disapproval is, if I am a buyer and I say that I will revoke this transaction, terminate the transaction, unless the seller agrees to XYZ repairs, that is not an unconditional revocation. And all I can say is that if it hasn't happened before, it's bound to happen, where a seller may be looking for a way to get out of the transaction, and the buyer, or to keep the buyer in the transaction, and the buyer terminates, but does it unconditionally, and the 10 days then expires. If you have a conditional termination within the 10-day period, but no unconditional termination, the buyer is stuck, and they're in that transaction for better or worse, and the only way they can get out of it at that point in time is by forfeiting the earnest money. Do you see much of this, Jeff, in regards to termination, that the notice of disapproval sometimes has attached conditions to it?
I don't see that very often, but what I do oftentimes see people doing is, instead of using a buyer's repair addendum, they'll use the blank addendum, and the starting preamble to their request for repairs will have language to the effect of what you've just stated. Buyer hereby notifies seller of their unconditional disapproval of the property based on the inspection report unless seller agrees to do the following repair items, and then they list them. And I think that's very confusing and really a tough way to negotiate that. And I think you do, create some risk there for your clients when you attempt to use language like that, because not all parties understand what it means. I think you're setting up some failure there.
Agreed. Okay, so then the next addendum is 058. That's a professional inspection addendum, and by using that, essentially what the parties are doing is electing not to use the protocol in the sale agreement, but to go outside of it. Now, the major difference between the professional inspection addendum and the text in the sale agreement itself is this. It does not differ in regards to the inspection contingency period. It does not differ in the requirement that you've got to negotiate with the seller any repairs and so on within that inspection contingency period. That's all the same whether it's inside or outside the sale agreement, or in other words, whether or not you use the addendum. Where it does differ, though, is that in the sale agreement, it essentially allows the buyer to have the property inspected from or with as many different inspectors as the buyer elects, so assuming that they stay within the inspection contingency period. And the only exception to that would be certain types of inspections that are deemed to be invasive, such as digging around the oil tanks or things like that, or taking moisture samples from inside the cladding of the property. Also radon is one of those that has to be specifically called out. But with that exception, the buyer has an unlimited number or type of inspections. Under the sale agreement, under the addendum, however, it's slightly different. And that is the sale agreement, or the addendum, enumerates a whole bunch of different inspections. For better or worse, what I think, and Jeff, you'll have to correct me on this, but sometimes, essentially, when that addendum is used, the result is that the buyer or the buyer's agent just checks all the boxes.
Yeah, I think a lot of buyers, and I'm going to scoot a little closer to the mic, I think a lot of buyers use the addendum, or excuse me, a lot of agents use the addendum with their clients as a risk management tool so that they can show in the record of their transaction, well, I recommended that we talked about all of these different possible types of inspections, and you saw this addendum to see, what the most common ones are. And I think they feel that that's a good risk management tool. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I think you counteract that if you just check all the boxes and give the buyer the right to have all of these inspections, and you don't really talk it through with them and explain to them, and they don't pick specific inspections that they want to have performed on the property. I don't know how that protects your risk any more than just using the provision that's in the sale agreement. If all you're going to do is check all the boxes and give the buyer the right, and you don't have a discussion that you document with your client about what specific inspections they may want, I'm not sure you're accomplishing the goal that you're hoping for.
Agreed. Plus, again, looking at it from a lawyer's perspective, as to what could go wrong with using that addendum, I think there is an issue if you check all the boxes, but you only do 3, and then the one that should have been selected, or should have been actually selected, is not undertaken. It was checked, but it was never undertaken. And so then you open yourself up to you as a realtor having selected or checked boxes that were never exercised. The other problem, which is an interesting turnaround, is, and I've heard this more than once, is that for some reason lenders, when you have a standard professional inspection under the sale agreement itself, lenders do not necessarily ask for a copy of that. And yet, when the addendum is used, and they see in the transactional documents that there's a whole bunch of inspections that are checked, lenders sometimes or often request to see copies of those reports. So for whatever reason, they don't ask for it as much if it is just a standard professional inspection. But when they're called out in the addendum, it does. So the very people that were behind using this addendum, and there were a lot of them, particularly in the Mid-Valley, have now moved away from using that addendum and have opted instead just to go through the standard inspections called for in the sale agreement, and the buyer exercises whatever right to inspections they want, but they're not specifically called out, and apparently the lenders are okay with that.
You know, I've heard that a lot in my tenure on the committee, but I got to say I've never actually witnessed that, not only in my own business, but also as a managing broker for a large company in the Portland metro area. I've never experienced that happening, where a lender will specifically request a copy of an inspection report simply based on the fact that the inspection was asked for as an opportunity for the buyer to do. Now, I do see that a underwriter or a lender may ask for a copy of underlying inspection report when a repair is requested by the buyer that's negotiated that they're made aware of. They may want to see the inspection report that shows the issue. But I have yet to see that in my own practice where, because the buyer said, for example, I want to have a radon test, that the lender then says, well, I want a copy of that radon test result. I haven't seen that happen. That objection actually came up. We added line 254 to the sale agreement where it says identify additional inspections. We added that last year, I believe. And there was a lot of discussion about whether or not adding that and people writing in radon test, sewer scope there would trigger that, would trigger the opportunity for an underwriter to say, oh, I see you asked for a sewer scope, I want a copy of it. I use this all the time personally in my own practice, and I haven't seen that. So I'm not sure that that is really a concern that's legitimate, or that it happens commonly. You know, that the objection has come up, so it must have happened in the past, or maybe happens in some areas of the state, but at least in the Portland metro area, I don't see that as a common practice. But I do like very much having the opportunity to, instead of using the full addendum, having this identify additional inspections line where I can write, hey, I'm recommending a radon test, I'm recommending a sewer scope for this property, or maybe a tank locate for this property, depending upon its location, without having to use a separate addendum to add those in. I think that was a good change. If it's okay with you, Phil, before we move on, we've got some questions that I think we can clear out quickly that pertain to some of the things we've already talked about before we get too far into the agreement. So we have a number of questions about the wood stove removal policies and the addendum itself. So what I'm going to say is I would encourage you to read the document, but some of the questions are, you know, who's the policing authority? Is somebody going to get in trouble if they accept responsibility for the wood stove and then don't remove it? What I can tell you is the DEQ is the policing entity for that. Are there DEQ police running around checking to see if you've removed a non-certified wood stove device? I don't know. But if that is the case, I think there's a fine associated, and you know, it could be an issue for somebody. So I wouldn't, as the realtor, be recommending one way or the other. I would just follow the law, and the law says if you have an uncertified wood burning device in the home, it needs to be removed prior to closing or within 30 days after closing. That's the advice that I would give to a client, and I would leave it at that. So I hope that answers those series of questions on that. In regard to the inspection period, we have two questions specific to, is there a limit to the length of the inspection period? The answer is yes and no. If you use the default in the agreement and you don't change the language, if you don't put a date in, it defaults to 10 business days. And that same default period is on the addendum number 058 as well. So the time periods marry up and they're the same. But you can write in whatever number your buyer wants. If your buyer wants a 25 or 30-day inspection period, they can request that. And then it's a negotiable point between the buyer and the seller. So there is not a limit. You can request whatever the buyer wants for an inspection period. But you know, it's a negotiable point. If you leave it blank, it's going to be 10 business days. And you would do that by addendum. You know, if you want to extend the inspection period, if you get to a point in the transaction where you're still negotiating and you need time to extend, then you would need to do that by blank addendum. Okay, so let's take a further look through bank-owned properties where the seller refuses to do any repairs or corrections. Regarding the wood stove, you know what? I have personally in my own practice, I'm going to use that because I think it's covered up the mic. I have, in my own practice, had to have a buyer be willing to remove the wood stove prior to closing and get permission from the seller or at least the listing agent. That's a tricky issue, and I don't have a hard and fast answer for you on that. You might have to nuance that a little bit. If the seller is a bank and they're not willing to do any repairs and they won't give permission for the buyer to do any repairs prior to closing, but there's a wood stove and the buyer can't get the loan unless it's removed, then you know, you may have an issue there to negotiate. So, okay. Then the last question that I want to clear out before we move on here is regarding professional inspection language states the land and dwelling shall be inspected. Does this mean that those inspections checked must be completed? So that's a good question. So in the sale agreement itself, it states that the buyer's unconditional right of disapproval is based on the unconditional right of disapproval of the inspection report, not the property. So that implies that the buyer has to have completed an inspection by use of a licensed professional, as the language is stated in the sale agreement. So the buyer doesn't have an unconditional right to just terminate without having had the home inspected, because their right of disapproval is of the report, not the property. So, that does imply that they're going to hire a professional inspection or licensed contractor to inspect the element of the property they want inspected and terminate if they're going to, based upon their unconditional disapproval of the report. So I hope that answers that. So I think we're pretty well clear. And
okay. If I didn't mention it, my apologies, but a very useful document that ORF has online is called Realtor's Guide for OREF Statewide Forms. And it was quite a lengthy process to build this, but it's a matrix, and it goes through every form that we have with a column identifying the form number, a column identifying the form title, and then a column identifying the form's purpose, and then a set of realtor tips. And the reason that I mention this is because in regards to the wood stove question, if you were looking at the matrix right now, as I am, under the realtor tips, you would see that, number one, we have a whole lot of tips about the whole issue, and then we also have a link to the Oregon Heat Smart program. The Oregon Heat Smart program, which describes this removal requirement and so on. So for those of you that would like to learn more about it, or actually almost any of the addenda here that are described, if there's something legally involved, we have a hot link to one or more sources. So it's very, very useful in that regard. And in regards to whether or not a wood stove is removed, or whether or not there's wood stove DEQ police running around, again, as a lawyer, my concern is if that wood stove stays there, let's say it's a seller carry transaction and there is no lender, nobody knows or cares about an uncertified wood stove, and that uncertified wood stove causes some carbon monoxide and results in people dying, then you're going to have some massive, massive liability. So the takeaway here is the concern isn't, at least in my opinion, whether or not the DEQ is going to find out. My concern is whether Murphy's Law is going to kick in and there would be some kind of a disaster, a catastrophe resulting from a uncertified wood stove that remained in the property after closing.
Yeah, and that document that Phil referred to, the matrix, is titled The Realtor Guide for OREF Statewide Forms, and you can find that on ZipForms. If you go to the OREF library and do the drop-down menu, you see it alphabetically listed there. Realtor Guide to OREF Statewide Forms. Okay.
The next addendum in the sale agreement is OREF 021. That's the lead-based paint disclosure addendum. And lead-based paint, this addendum has been around. It's a federally mandated form, although we have configured it a little bit differently, but it's got the same information in it. And of course, the point is, just a second. Do we have a question? Okay. The point is, or the purpose of this is, if the property is pre-1978, there's a high likelihood it's got lead-based paint. Then you have to use the lead-based paint disclosure addendum, and that addendum is required by federal law. As I say, it applies to properties called target housing, which is pre-78, and you want to make sure that everybody signs it. I see every once in a while transactions where the lead-based paint document is not signed by everybody, or worse yet, they don't think about it, and then they try to go back and sign it midway through the transaction. That's not a real good practice, because until the delivery of the addendum, homeowners, home buyers, have a 10-day period, it's a calendar day period, within which to terminate the transaction. So if you never gave the form, then there will be a right of revocation all the way up to the time of closing. So it's very important to use. I rarely see situations where the seller responds in the form saying, I've had an inspection, here's the reports. So the very fact that it does not result in the delivery of any new information to the buyer is secondary to the fact that the form itself has to be fully signed and in the file.
Yeah, and you alluded to something that the time period is 10 calendar days. And I get that question a lot. Why do we have business days everywhere else in our agreement, but it's calendar days in that one contingency?
And the answer is because the Fed said so. And the law in regards to preemption is pretty simple. If the federal law is more strict than the state law, the federal law will prevail. If the state law is more strict, the state law will prevail. And just to bring that home, this is why, under the whole marijuana thing, that the federal law trumps. And that is, even though state law in Oregon is more liberal in regards to the use of marijuana, the federal law says it's a controlled substance, regardless whether it's medical or otherwise. And since that's more strict than the Oregon law, it trumps Oregon law. The only reason that Oregon law, or that Oregonians continue to use, manufacture, sell, and so on marijuana is simply because the Fed has chosen to turn a blind eye to it as long as it's confined to the state law itself, and the state law is being followed. Okay, we're going to look next at 054, seller possession after closing, 054. We actually have two forms, and let's see if I've got the numbers of both of them. Maybe it's 055. Yeah, I don't, oh yeah, okay. 053 is agreement to occupy before closing, and 054 is agreement to occupy after closing. The 2015 sale agreement only identifies 054 and not 053. When the new form sale agreement comes out, it will identify both agreement to occupy before closing and agreement to occupy after closing. I'm not going to spend much time on agreeing to occupy before closing. I think it is exceedingly dangerous for a lot of different reasons with a buyer to go in prior to closing, because if the buyer decides against the transaction at some point in time, you got a couple of problems. One, getting the buyer out and getting the property on the market, and then also an argument about perhaps recovering possession in a timely manner. So that's just a big issue if it's an agreement to occupy before closing. The agreement to occupy after closing, 054, is does get some use, and I can tell you that it's a lot better than for realtors to try to draft a provision themselves. So what we've done is we have taken the agreement to occupy after closing and just directed folks to use 054. Jeff, do you have any opinions or discussion on the use of this post-closing form?
Yeah, we made that change. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, but there used to be a lot more language in the sale agreement itself about what would happen if a seller wanted to possess after closing. But it wasn't fully descriptive, and it didn't define the full contingency, essentially, or not contingency, but liability, right? Who had to insure what, and how long did it go for, and whose responsibility was this and that. So we removed the language in the sale agreement really to force people to use the agreement to occupy after closing if the seller is going to possess the property for any time period after closing, whether it's a day or a month. If the seller possesses the house for a day after closing, I have had a lot of people say, well, it seems ridiculous to have to use this whole document. And that, you know, I understand that, but it's not going to be ridiculous to your clients if there's a pipe break or a house fire or some significant trauma to the property during that 24-hour period that the seller has possession, and no one told the seller that they needed to keep the property insured or have a tenant's policy or anything like that, and you have an uninsured casualty to deal with that is a financial burden for the buyer or the seller or both, and now everybody's looking at you. So the liability is just too great. Even if it's only 24 hours after closing, there's liability, and it needs to be properly accounted for and addressed and understood by all parties, and that's why we're directing people to use that document.
Well, and of course, there's another good reason, and that is if the seller, for however long they're staying there, let's just say it's just 2 or 3 days, but if for some reason they refuse to vacate, you've got to have a protocol in regards to recovery of possession, and maybe, which the form has, a liquidated damage clause that says that it will be a per diem portion of the PITI. And so that's exceedingly important. There's no requirement that you have to agree to a security deposit. If it's a day, perhaps you don't want to do that. But you do want to address the situation where a seller refuses to vacate. And I've seen this fairly recently where the seller was having a home built and so they retained possession for a while, and then all of a sudden the home that was being built fell far behind. The seller had nowhere to go and literally refused to vacate, and yet I think the buyers had given notice to their landlord and needed to move in, so you had a real clash there. And I suspect the situation resolved itself because the realtors did use that form, and the damage provision and the attorney fees and everything else pretty much convinced the seller that it would be more prudent to leave than to fight.
Yeah, I was just at a signing appointment last night, and the escrow officer was describing an event where a seller had moved to California, and it was a weekend possession. Seller moved out, and there was no agreement to occupy after closing in place, but the buyer didn't get occupancy. No one had the property insured for that weekend. The pipes froze. There was major water damage, several $100,000 worth of damage because no one was there watching the property. So it's a real issue, and that's why we've made that modification.
Okay. And by the way, thanks for explaining that because I get asked that question too about why do we have this long form if it's only going to be 1 or 2 days. And I think after the discussion today, hopefully people will understand that the answer is that it's largely because there are certain unknowns that can occur, and when they do occur, if it hasn't been addressed in the form and it's addressed simply in additional provisions or something like that, invariably things will fall through the cracks. Okay, let's see. I think the next thing is I'm looking now at the FERPTA tax withholding obligation section, and I'm looking at the 2015 form, not the 2016 form. What we did was we took, because the FERPTA provision was so long, that what we did is we took it out and moved it into an addendum. And so what you formerly saw as a long provision in regards to FERPTA has now been substantially shortened up. And most of you probably have not had occasion to have FERPTA involved. FERPTA it stands for the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act, and essentially it says that if the seller is a foreign person, then there is going to be 10% of the gross sale price that's going to be required to be delivered to the Internal Revenue Service within 20 days of closing. And the draconian side of this law says that, and if the money isn't withheld, that the buyer becomes responsible to pay that sum. So it's incumbent on both parties, and particularly the buyer, to make sure that that FERPTA issue is thoroughly vetted. And the thinking by most people is that with the large amount of foreign investment, more and more, that we're going to start seeing some FERPTA transactions where, in fact, the seller is a foreign person. And FERPTA, I want to mention, FERPTA doesn't apply if the sale price is $300,000 or less, if the property is used by the buyer as a residence, and the law does not say a primary residence, but there is a 50% occupancy requirement, and thirdly, that the buyer is an individual. So with those criteria, then FERPTA wouldn't apply even if the seller is a foreign person. And we could have all sorts of discussions about what qualifies as a foreign person and so on. But Suffice it to say that, number one, this issue was vetted, at least in the Portland metro area, by the RMLS listing form that now asks whether or not the seller is a foreign person. It's also addressed in the sale agreement itself under the seller representations, where the seller says, I am not a foreign person. And it will also be addressed in the addendum itself, so that if there is any hint that the seller is a foreign person, then my recommendation is have them sign the addendum, the seller sign the addendum, and ask the title company to vet that issue, which they will, hopefully. Most, but not all companies will handle that leg of the transaction, and they require the seller to sign a particular form, an official form, that if the seller signs it and says, I am not a foreign person, that will exonerate the buyer in the event that the seller lied. Okay.
Yeah, and I want to just say that I applaud the Forms Committee and ORE for getting on the front side of that. I do believe we're going to see more circumstances where FERPTA does apply as we move forward into the future. There's been a lot of foreign investment in the Portland real estate market and the Oregon real estate market. So we've really tried to be on the front side of that issue and have a fully described event there, right? I mean, making sure that all parties understand it and know what the liabilities are to it. And I want to address that. So you're going to see that change in the 2016 documents. And we have a question going back to the agreement to occupy after closing about the casualty insurance and how that applies. You're going to see some changes to those forms too. We've really tried to vet that issue by correctly quantifying what needs to happen, right? So the seller, the buyer of the property needs to have the property insured upon closing for their purposes. If the seller is going to occupy after closing, they're going to need a tenant's policy, coverage policy, and they're going to need the seller, the buyer of the property, to be added as an additional insured on the policy. So we've really vetted that language in broad detail, and that language I think that you're going to see on the documents moving forward in 2016 is much more accurate to what the insurance needs are if that circumstance exists.
To clarify, when Jeff says a tenant's policy, this is not just a policy that insures the seller for their personal property. A tenant's policy can include, and in this case in our clause, it does include liability insurance. So the main issue, at least as far as I'm concerned, is that the new buyer have coverage in the event, say, of a slip and fall on the property. Buyer owns it, but seller's in possession, and if you have a slip and fall, you're going to have liability that could accrue not only to the seller retaining possession, but to the new buyer who never did retain possession, but it was the buyer's property. So that's why the liability insurance is important.
Yeah, a couple of question clearing items here. So in regard to a question about how do you define a foreign person, we're not going to get into that on this call for the purpose that it depends on the transactions and the circumstances and whether or not FERPTA will apply. And Phil's already alluded to that a little bit. You can use the document, and you'll see in the addendum that's created, that's coming out in the 2016 library, I think it fully describes that, and you'll be able to use that as a resource. We have a question about which part identifies the withholding amount when the seller is moving out of state. And on the sale agreement, that currently is item 27.1, the seller advisory regarding Oregon state tax withholding obligations. That's not changing. That is going to stay the same, and that section will still exist in the upcoming 2016 agreement. If you have questions, you can refer to that. Then we have a question about the keys. In the agreement to occupy after closing, when do the keys get given to the buyer? At closing or at possession? And I think that that's a question that's fair and comes up. My attitude, my personal, I'll tell you how I manage it personally, is that because it's clear in the document that no landlord-tenant relationship is created in this agreement for the seller to occupy after closing, that the seller does not have a right to get keys to the property until they have a right of possession to that property. They're not a landlord. The seller is not maintaining possession as a tenant. They are agreeing to occupy after closing. So I don't believe that the seller has a right, the buyer, excuse me, has a right to get the keys until they have a right of possession. Now, that's my personal opinion, and that's how I work in my transactions and what I try to clarify for all parties when that comes up. I'd be interested in your take on that, Phil.
Well, no, I don't disagree. I don't disagree in any respect. If I'm a seller retaining possession, I certainly, number one, want access, and I don't want to have a buyer having access or a buyer's friend or something like that. I will say that the fact that a seller is not a, quote, tenant with a capital T under landlord-tenant law is only good for 90 days. That is to say, right, if the agreement to retain possession exceeds 90 days, it will automatically turn into a landlord-tenant relationship, and you don't want that to happen. Because if you have a landlord-tenant relationship, then that would essentially force, under the seller possession agreement, it would change the terms of the seller possession agreement and would effectively make the buyer liable for habitability, for heating, cooling, plumbing, all those other issues that landlords are required to be responsible for, including obviously repairs, and you don't want that to happen. It wouldn't under the seller possession agreement because we expressly say so, but you don't want to use that and have an agreement in excess of 90 days. Okay, the next thing I'm going to mention is discuss is 045. That's the historic property addendum, 045. And I can remember we went through several iterations before we got it right and published it. But the historic property addendum, I think the takeaway is if the property is historic property or will be used as historic property, that you as a broker want to make sure that you understand what you know what you're doing, and certainly the best place to start is to use that form itself, 045, historic property addendum, because it addresses many of the important aspects of historic property, such as not only the tax advantages, but when are those advantages going to be expiring? What are the responsibilities of the new buyer? And the one thing I want to add, and I think this is also in the historic property addendum itself, and that is that there are some local, city and county historic preservation programs that aren't state or federal, and so it's important to have all of those issues vetted. Have you seen, Jeff? I think it's out in the Lake Oswego area primarily, where the area itself, some neighborhoods have some local preservation programs.
Yeah, I know Lake Oswego does. There are some areas in northeast Portland that have some local guidelines and things. The truth is, personally, in my own practice, I don't sell a lot of property that falls in that category, so I'm not the best person to provide information on that. I would just say, certainly you want to use that addendum so that one of the things in creating that addendum, the Forms Committee tried to do was really inform a buyer about, what happens if you own a property that's in a historic district and what kind of things you may be responsible for as a purchaser of that property. They're going to want to know. So, if you're selling a property that's within a historic district or you suspicion that it might be, talk to your managing broker in your office, talk to some of the other realtors that work that area, and find out for sure.
Okay, that is it on the addenda in the sale agreement, the residential sale agreement, I believe. Now, there are a lot of ancillary forms, addenda, that would be and are used in relation to that, but they're not specifically called out. And hopefully, if we have time, we'll talk about them. So I'm going to move to the next sale agreement, and that's farms and ranches. And again, this is obviously a highly specialized area for a lot of obvious reasons. And the form itself does not have any specific addenda called out, other than those that are already contained in the residential sale agreement, such as the well addendum and so on, the septic. But I want to, at least when we're talking about this particular form, mention that how important it is to be using a form that is created specifically for these special uses, and farm and ranch property is very important. And I'm looking at the form itself. You don't have it in front of you, but it covers UCC filings, crops and timber, public and private grazing rights, agricultural foreign investment laws, because there is, interestingly, a federal law that places limitations on foreign investment of agricultural property. So it's got a lot of different issues that are addressed and called out in the Farms and Ranches form, and I want to just mention that. Other than that, the forms that we've already covered are also contained in that sale agreement. The next form is new construction, and I'd mentioned earlier that, yes, in the new construction form, there are some addenda, and I'll go to one of them here. That's, let's see, it's 025, or excuse me, 026. And 026 relates to what I would call the walkthrough situation, where the property has not been completed yet, construction hasn't been completed yet, and so the buyer wants to have an opportunity prior to closing to do a walkthrough. And this is the only provision for a walkthrough in all of the sale agreements, but it's a useful one, and one that I think you want to be familiar with. Again, it's 026, and it's got a protocol in the form itself in regards to the punch list items. So it calls out, requires that there be punch list items that the buyer can prepare, that the buyer feels are not in substantial compliance with the applicable code, or with local building standards, or with the plans and specifications. So if those items, and those are the big ticket items, if those items are not consistent, then the buyer has the right in the punch list to require that they be completed, and it's up to the seller, builder, to complete those items prior to closing. And it says that the seller shall correct habitability items on the punch list prior to the closing date. And if seller is unable to do so, after making a good faith effort, the closing date shall be extended by an amount of time reasonably necessary for completion, but no event exceeding X business days, and we have 7 as a default. So those are the sort of things addressed in the new construction form that are important to address. And I think, again, it's far better than trying to draft a walkthrough provision yourself.
I really personally like the new construction sale agreement and this addendum, form number 026, the professional alternative inspection addendum for new construction. I think it does a very good job of walking that fine line between requirement for the builder and requirement for the buyer. Too often, I think, in a new construction circumstance, you find a buyer who maybe is a little bit unrealistic about some of the cosmetic issues or some of the items that the builder's doing for them in the home, and they want to delay closing, or they want to try and hold up the transaction waiting for a small sheetrock patch or a nail pop or something like that. I think this form and this document does a very adequate job of putting the builder on notice. Hey, these are the things that you've got to do before closing, and here's what the buyer's rights are for termination if you don't. But it also puts the buyer on notice to be realistic, that you can't, reasonably delay closing over a cosmetic issue that's not a habitability problem. You got to close the transaction. So I really like the form. I think it's well written, and if you are selling a new construction property, I encourage you to use these documents very much.
I agree. I mean, this form, I have seen various new construction contracts floating around. Some of them are association driven, but I think that this form is far superior to all of them I've seen. So it's a good form to use.
Yeah, and I think that, there's a question about what about circumstances where you have a builder that's using their own form. And, you know, for most of the major national builders, that's going to be the case. And there's some risk there, right? I mean, what I always tell a client, and I might be wrong in saying this, but what I always tell a buyer is, you know, if the form was created by the company that you're buying the home from, then that form was created by their attorneys to protect them. I mean, that's why they do it. Now, I'm not saying that it's wholly a one-sided document, but certainly, you know, they've drafted that form to protect their client, their seller, their builder. This form, the new construction sale agreement by OREF, is a fair document. It's a good document, just like the residential sale agreement is. You're not always going to be able to use it in those circumstances, and we know that. But it's a good document for the circumstances when you can.
Because it creates a level playing field. It isn't tilted solely in favor of the seller as opposed to the buyer.
Yeah. There's a question about where it talks about that walkthrough in the new construction addendum and sale agreements. And if you just read through, if you look at the new construction professional inspection addendum, without reading that whole paragraph to you on this call, I would just encourage you to read through that. It's pretty specific. I think if you read the document, you'll see where it's referring to that.
Yeah, it's only a half-page document, and it requires the seller to correct all habitability items on the punch list prior to the closing date. Let's see. Oh, just as an aside, if anybody is looks at the new construction and says, "Well, wait a minute, you idiots! Why is there a lead-based paint inspection provision here? If it was built this year, it certainly isn't pre-78." And the answer is basically, although it's highly unlikely, it is possible where you could have new construction, but you could have a garage, a shed, an outbuilding that was built pre-78. And the lead-based paint law applies to all structures. So that's why it's in there. And I realized that I neglected to talk about the on-site sewage system situation where property isn't on public sewer. That is Form OREF 081. It's called On-Site Sewage System Addendum, and that's a pretty good form. There was a lot of time that was spent developing that by some of the folks that really do that day in and day out, and I think they did a pretty good job of addressing all the various nuances on these systems.
There are a lot of new DEQ guidelines in regard to septic systems and maintenance. That was part of the genesis for the creation of this form. It's not as simple as, you know, is there an on-site sewage system or a septic tank, and when was it pumped, and, you know, is it working? There may be an ongoing burden of maintenance if it's a system that requires a sand filtration system and things like that. So, yeah, they did a great job creating that document. By all means, if you're selling a property where there is an on-site sewage system of any kind, you want to use that form to protect your client.
Yeah. Okay, with that, I'm going to move to the commercial real estate sale agreement because as I said, there are no additional addenda called for in the prior agreement. So we're going to move to a commercial real estate sale agreement. And this form, let me see, I don't think that there are any specific addenda called out, although I do want to mention a couple of things. One, in this commercial real estate sale agreement is that it does address the issue that's fairly common in commercial transactions, and that would be for non-refundable deposits. Now, some of you may say, well, wait a minute, what's the difference between the commercial real estate sale agreement and that investment property addendum?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the commercial sale agreement was really created for the purpose of if you know it's a commercial project, right? So if it's an apartment complex or a multiple unit property that's greater than 4 units, it's considered non-residential, right? But you might have a duplex or a triplex or a quad that by its nature is considered a residential purchase. So you would use the residential sale agreement, but it's being purchased for the purpose of investment. You have an investor buying a quad, for example, and they want rent rolls, they want documents about, you know, profit and loss and you know, information about expenses and everything for the property. You would use the investment property addendum in conjunction with the residential sale agreement in that circumstance, and not necessarily the commercial form.
Okay, I'm gonna repeat the same thing. Number one, if it's 4 or less, use the investment property addendum.
Right.
If it's over 4, use the commercial real estate sale agreement. And there are no specific provisions or addenda in the commercial sale agreement, although I will say that there is one market difference in this agreement, and that is that there is an election, an option to elect whether or not dispute resolution is going to be through mediation arbitration or whether or not it's going to be through the court system, and the parties have to elect.
One last comment I'd make about that as a previous managing broker for a large company. If you're going to sell commercial real estate, it's not something you should do if you haven't done it. Just because OREF has a form for you to use does not mean you're an expert and can therefore go out and sell commercial real estate without any experience. I'm not telling you not to sell commercial real estate, but I'm telling you, if I were you and you hadn't done a commercial transaction and you have a client who's wanting to buy a investment property of any kind that is commercial in nature, I would cooperate with another realtor that has some expertise and get some help with that transaction. Whether you refer it, whether you work the transaction with them and use it as a learning opportunity, I would not go into that transaction blindly. There's great risk for you. Usually, most E&O insurance providers have different standards for deductible on commercial transactions versus residential transactions. You're going to want to talk to your managing broker about what those differences are and what your liabilities will be in a commercial transaction. They will most likely, if not definitely, be different than they would be in a residential transaction. So just because the form exists doesn't mean you can use it with reckless abandon, right?
Yep. Okay, we're going to jump to the vacant land real estate sale agreement. It does not have any specific addenda that are called out beyond those of the residential real estate sale agreement. But just as we've been saying, be careful about being involved in the sale or purchase of vacant land because of there's so many other additional issues such as cemeteries and landfills and dumps and unrecorded access easements, harvesting, fishing, hunting, livestock. All of those things are unique oftentimes to vacant land. Vacant land, at least if it includes farmland, and it's very, very important for users of this particular form to use it with knowledge of what it is that they're doing or to co-op with somebody that can give them some direction. Do you have anything to add on that?
No, I agree with everything you said. We have a quick question about commercial. And so the question is, I have an owner-occupied duplex, zoned R1, Class 4 duplex. It was built as a residence and was changed years later to a duplex. Do I need to use the investment property addendum? And I would say that depends on your buyer. If the buyer purchasing the property is purchasing it for an investment, and they want the information that most investors would want, such as rent rolls and profit and loss information, then by all means you should use the investment property addendum. If, however, their use is going to be residential in nature, you may not need that addendum. It's case by case.
Okay. Then I think the last agreement is the residential condominium agreement. And again, this is, the sale of condominiums is far, far different, in my opinion, than the sale of single-family residences. And you can see that pretty easily in the sale agreement itself. The condition of the property oftentimes, in my opinion, is somewhat secondary to the condition of the governance. And there's a huge section of the sale agreement that addresses the condominium documents and the requirement that the buyer has a right to review the HOA articles of incorporation, the rules and regulations, any policies, minutes of the last, I think it's 1 or 2 years.
12 months.
12 months, yeah. And reserve studies, potential construction defect claims, all of those. And I can assure you that those are not addressed at all in the, not only in the residential sale agreement, but they're not addressed very extensively in the seller property disclosure. Seller property disclosure is woefully inadequate on this, on the sale of condominiums. It touches on a couple things, but that's about it. And then other than that, it's got all of the same standard addenda. And I think, is there a question here? Because I want to just run through some things here on our other forms. Anything?
Yeah, so real quick on the condominium. So where you would use the condominium obviously is if it's a condominium. But what about if it's a townhouse or even a single-family detached property that's involved part of a planned community development, right? And so we do have an addendum for that purpose. There is a townhouse / planned community development addendum, and I don't know the form number, but I'm sure you can find it in your library if you're scrolling through. You'll want to use that document because many townhomes and detached properties that are part of a large homeowners association, you want to see the reserve study. You want to make sure that there aren't any possible special assessments coming or anything like that. So that addendum is very helpful for that purpose. We do have a couple of other questions to clear up quickly. And so it says, what sections of the 2016 agreements are being eliminated to reduce the pages? And the answer is we have shortened the purpose section and we have revised and modified the dispute resolution section so that it's a little more concise. And that's the meat of what is changing to create a shorter document. We've also eliminated a few other sections that you won't even notice missing. For example, the final section where it had the realtor information on the last page, all of that information now is being moved to the final agency acknowledgement section. So instead of having part of your information in one part of the agreement and then the rest of your information in the rest of the agreement, it's all in one area. So you're not really going to notice big sections or gaps missing of contingencies or anything material to make room or make that agreement smaller. Okay, that answers that. And I think that's pretty much it. I'll answer a few other questions individually after you finish what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, I just want to touch on some other addenda that are not specifically called out that I think do get some usage, and I want to make sure that they get as much as appropriate. Number one is Form 009. That's the backup offer addendum. And that in this day and age is a very important document to be using. Do you want to just address the use of this Form 0 backup 009?
Yeah, I think the backup offer addendum is a very important document. If you're going to be if you're going to put a buyer in backup position, don't just put that on a blank addendum or in the additional provisions. Use this document. It fully spells out what that contingency is and what their rights are, what the seller's rights are, and what the buyer's rights are. In a backup offer situation, the worst thing you can do is put your client, if you're the listing agent, in the risk of having sold their home to more than one buyer, right? The backup offer addendum will protect you from that possibility. So use that document if you're in that circumstance. The other circumstance where you would use this document is if you receive a bumpable, if you've got a buyer for your listing and they're in a bumpable position, and then you get an acceptable offer, an offer that the seller wants to accept, and they want to bump that first position buyer out of the way, but they want to respond to the offer that's on the table. You could use the backup offer addendum in response with a counter offer to say, we're going to go bump, the first position buyer, give them their right of exercising their contingency one way or the other, and in the meantime, we're going to put you in backup position until that's resolved. So you can use that as a tool and a vehicle to respond to that second buyer's offer without putting them in the risk of having sold it twice.
Okay, I think we're bumping up against, what time is it here?
10:54. I think we are bumping up against the clock.
Okay, let me just leave you with some forms of some significance, and I think they get some use, and they should be OREF 022A. That's the buyer's repair addendum. 022B, seller's response, and 023, notice and acceptance of completion of repairs. That's an important series of documents to be using. And then lastly, Jeff had mentioned the condo townhouse addendum. That's OREF 024.
Great. Quick questions to clear. Will the webinar be available for viewing at a later date? And the answer, I believe, is yes. It'll be available in about 2 weeks on the OREF online website. When will the forms changes be available at OREF online? That will happen when we roll out the 2016 form suite, and that's usually going to be late December, early January at the latest, but probably late December. We just had a couple of other quick questions. You know, my experience with the Realtor Guide is that it's not updated. It's updated every year. So that guide will be updated for your use. So be on the lookout for that. And then there's a last question about, you know, how does a broker find out if the wood burning fireplace or wood stove is an uncertified device? That's a great question, right? So it's usually the certification tag is on the back. Some tricks that I've heard are take your smartphone and turn the camera facing you and hold the phone back on the back side of the device and click it so that you can get a picture of the back of the device to see if there's an EPA certification tag. One other tip that I'll just give you is if it's got metal doors, it is a non-certified device. So you can almost assuredly know that if it's a fireplace that's got metal doors on the front instead of glass doors, it's not certified. Those are the tips that I've got for you on that.
Okay,
and I think that's it.
Okay, I think with that we're going to sign off. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Phil and Jeff. We appreciate all your knowledge. Next up, we're going to be having Christina with ZipLogic to talk about ZipForm Plus and the new transaction management system that will be released in January. Just give us a couple minutes and we'll have Christina with you shortly. Thank you.
for attending today's tutorial on how to use ZipForm features such as ZipVault, which is our document storage component, and Zip TMS, along with many new exciting features that will be released to you guys at the start of the year, which one would be MLS Connect and MLS Push. I'm excited to announce, many of you may have heard the NAR announcement that NAR is going to be helping us with some of the things with our membership and allowing some of the features to be accessible to you. So I just wanted to again say thank you for attending. Some of you may have ZipForm and some of you may have not. So I am going to just go through and show you how ZipForm works and the questions, if you guys have any. You are free to use the chat box feature on the right side or wherever your panel is listed there. The panel will allow you to go through and ask any questions you may have. We were hoping to have one of my colleagues here to answer any questions. However, she was not able to make it. We will go ahead and answer any questions at the end of the webinar. If there's questions I cannot get to, please be patient with me. I can email you those answers or give you a call, and we can go through it on that part. So I just wanted to go ahead and we can go ahead and get started. First and foremost, again, thank you for everyone for attending. And you may have received a how-to guide. This how-to guide is in the handout section in the webinar. It will allow you to be able to go through and refer back to this guide should you have any questions. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. In addition to some of the other products that we're going to be doing in trainings like this, we're going to I'm going to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering this afternoon, give you a quick background about these tools that you're going to be using, some of which you may be familiar with, like I said. Some of you may have questions about, such as ZipVault. These are all created to and by us here at ZipLogic. So in addition to training like this, we will be able to go through and show you where all the help resources are at that are going to be right at your fingertips. And I'll point those out to you during this training. So ZipLogic's advantage is what I call, it's a number of different things. We have ZipVault, we have ZipLogic's Digital Ink, some of you may know is a DocuSign as well, who we partner with. We have ZipForm, we have MLS Connect, which is going to be an exciting feature coming next year for you, and MLS Push, and a single sign-on. And all of this is all in one location, which is what we call ZipForm Plus. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and sign in here. When you sign up, for those of you that have not signed up with ZipForm at all, you're going to see a screen here where you're going to be able to add in your credentials. Credentials are set forth once you receive permission to gain access to ZipForm via the Oregon Real Estate Forms. They will be able to approve those for you. For those of you that already have ZipForm, you know what to do. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And once we sign in, for those of you that are new and don't have any transactions, that's okay. You will see a blank screen. Here, I have a number of transactions, and hopefully you will too. That means you're doing good business. So here we have all of our transactions. So this is basically what the main page is going to look like when you log into your ZipForm account. Now, the one thing that I stress the most, we're going to talk about templates first. And the reason why is because of Zip TMS, which is going to be available to you come January. Zip TMS is going to allow you to be able to go through and create transactions, and it would be more of a transaction management solution for you. So within this feature, you're able to create checklists, you're able to create notes. So there's a lot of different functionalities that we can do. So I'm going to go ahead and allow you to see those areas here. I apologize for that. It looks like my screen may have been paused there. But so what I did is logged in. This is the main screen that we have, again. And then this is where the templates are, is where I'm going to show you. So we have our transactions, we have templates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on templates here. Once I click on templates, if you're not familiar with what a template is going to be a packet of forms. Now, this is going to allow you to be able to organize your work if you're dealing with a number of certain purchase agreements or purchase contracts. you can go right to a template, create the template, and have it available to you in your transaction. So here I'm going to do is I'm going to start a new template. So once I click New, I'm going to name my template. And I can choose whether it's going to be a listing, a purchase, or a lease. So let's choose purchase. And my property type, if it's residential, industrial, multi-unit. For those of you who are our ZipForm veterans, we have added some new features in here. You may see farm and ranch is one, condominium, manufactured home. For any of my brokerages that are on the call here, you're going to notice here we have global. You can assign templates to your entire office if you wish to do so. If you have a number of offices, you can delegate a template to a specific office by choosing the office section here. Agents, if you're just a single user agent, you will just see agent there. So we have our name here, which is the purchase template. Here's our template type and our property type here. I'm going to choose residential. Another new feature we added recently is our auto apply. This is a fantastic feature. This is going to allow you to be able to go through and automatically apply templates to whether it's a purchase contract, if it's a listing. So if you notice here, I have this option. It says apply this template to purchase residential new transactions. All right, so that's great. So we can go ahead and do that. For other reasons, I'm going to go ahead and just say do not apply because I'm going to show you an actual full template. I don't want to confuse myself here. So once I log in, I'm ready to start my template. Okay, so you're going to notice here on the left, we have little folders here, which I can explain later. On the right-hand side are all of the forms you can choose from to create your template. So if I am, let's say, in another area, if you have another part of another local association, I can choose to select library, and I can choose from other libraries here as well. Okay, so it just gives you some options there, especially if you're in other locations as well, in other associations. Since this is a purchase template, if I go to sort here, I'm going to click on that, and I go to categorized, I can go through and I can find my purchase contracts. So everything under purchase is going to be listed here along with any other areas. So it just kind of categorizes things for me so I can easily find all of my forms that are associated with the purchase. So just for example, I can just go through, I can check off the items I want to check to create my template. Okay, so here we have a cover sheet. I will talk about that in a minute. I think the cover sheet is going to be very beneficial to you. For those of you that use it, great. There's a lot of great things to be used with that cover sheet. Everything you add in that cover sheet is going to populate into other forms. However, since we are in templates, we want to leave these blank, right? So we leave those blank. Let's go up to where it says we have other tabs up here. I want to talk about our checklists here. So documents, we have parties. You don't necessarily need anything in here for parties, only because, again, this is our template. We don't have that information. Property, this is an area where you would be able to input any of the property information. Again, this is a template, so my suggestion is to leave this blank. And then checklists. So again, checklist is all part of our new rollout that we're coming out with in January. This is called TMS, Transaction Management System. Now, we want to go ahead and create a checklist. So first things first, we can go ahead and create a category. So if I click on New Category, I can choose my category name. I'll just use mortgage loan, for example. And I can choose a different color if I'd like. I'll go with red. So here is my category. Now my task. My tasks are going to be everything that falls under this category. So whether it's going to be to send a contract to a lender, get the clear to close from the lender. There's going to be other options there as well. So just as an example, let's say we'll need to send a contract to the lender. Okay. So here we have our task name. Checklist, this is if you have any additional checklists that you had already created, you'll have a drop down and those checklists will be listed here. This is required, so you can have the option to say yes, it's required, or no, it is not. And if it's been completed, obviously it's not, so we're going to leave that as no. Any additional comments you want to add in this area, you may do so. Now with the templates, we suggest you leave everything with the due date of relative. And the reason why, again, is because this is going to be a template you're going to use for a long time, hopefully, and all of the dates are not picked out yet. You don't have those dates. So we're going to do a relative date. So for the send the contract to the lender, we can do 3 days, we'll say after. So we can choose before or after. And then you have a full list here. We can do, we'll do the offer acceptance date, which makes most sense. So we can go down and choose offer acceptance date. Now, if let's say you wanted to attach a document to these, you can attach placeholders. So if I have a contract in hand, or if I have maybe it's a walkthrough, or maybe a pre-approval letter that I want to add in here for any of my tasks, I can create a placeholder and pull in those documents. So for example, we'll just do a pre-approval letter because I know I have that stored here. And I'm going to click OK. So once we do that, it's going to allow me to, once I get into my document, to be able to go ahead and pull that document in once I get into a transaction. I'll show you exactly what I mean in one moment here. So I'm going to save that. All right, so here we have our category and our new tasks. I want to actually show you a completed template with my checklist. So you can see full view what it looks like. There's my pre-approval placeholder letter that we had created. If I go to checklist, here's everything completed. So here you see a full spectrum of all the different categories, the different tasks, of course. This all varies depending on your business, what you are doing in that case. So this gives you an idea of what that looks like. Now, because this is new, of course, we're going to be doing a lot of trainings again and come January regarding ZipTMS. You'll be referred to some areas to help you learn and remember how this works. We have this little question mark on the right-hand side. This is our guided help. This is going to be located wherever you work on in ZipForm. So it's in the templates area. It's going to be in digital ink. It's going to be under all of the different functions you are in ZipForm Plus. So here it's going to tell you exactly how to do these specific functions. So here I can say, all right, I've never created a task. Show me how. So if I go ahead and click on that, you're going to notice the number 1 here. It's going to say, okay, to create a new checklist, click the new checklist button. Okay, we did that. And then you're going to click the white arrow here, step number 2. Number 2 is going to tell you basically to title your checklist. And it takes you step by step on how to do all the functions that I basically just showed you. And again, that's the guided help. All right, so now we have our templates. So we have all of our templates completed, which we do. We're ready to do business. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my transaction. I'm going to create a new transaction. I'm excited. I want to close my sale. I want to get it done in a hurry. So I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, let's do this. So I'm going to go ahead and name my transaction. Now here, I can add a photo of my transaction or of my property. So once I do that, I can go ahead and just choose a house. That's pretty. We'll go ahead and click on that. Transaction type, is it a listing, purchase, or lease? Now, if you remember, the template we created was purchase, right? So we did a purchase, and it was a residential. So once we click purchase and residential, you're going to notice down here at the bottom, it says purchase template with checklists. This is what we just created in our template area. If for some reason, maybe you click on listing residential and you don't see that, it's because maybe you had named your template under a different transaction type. So pay attention to that as well, because you may go into your transaction and realize, hey, my templates are missing, and then this more the reason why would be because of this. So we have the purchase, we have our property type as residential, my agent is myself. You can also apply additional templates. If you have other templates out there, maybe there's some other options in there, maybe a commercial. You can also add a template on top of a template. So the templates are a great item to have in ZipForm here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And once I save that, it pulls in all of my forms. Okay, so here's my pre-approval letter. Okay, let's say I have my pre-approval letter. I can go ahead and click on pre-approval and browse for the file. And I can go ahead and click on my area here where I'm going to grab the pre-approval letter. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Once I do that, it's going to pull in pre-approval. And any comments I want to add, I can do so. and click OK. And once I do that, it's going to place that document right in that area for me. So I have my pre-approval letter here, and I can do that for all of these other walkthroughs as well. So I have a placeholder that I had set up in my template for a final walkthrough. So I can do that again just to show you. So I'm going to click on that, go to Browse for File, and I can do the closing walkthrough checklist. And we'll let that open here. Click OK. And then the same thing for the inspection. So it's very nice and easy. Allows us to remember exactly what it is we need to add to this transaction and remind us that we need these items. Okay, so we have our transaction. Now just a little bit about this area you're seeing all around here. On the right-hand side, it's just set up exactly the way you saw with the templates. We have all of our forms here on the right. You can also move these out of the way by just clicking on the tabs. That's going to minimize that for you. Again, our guided help. Search for form name or description is going to allow you to be able to pull in exactly what it is you're looking for in a live view. And then to talk about the areas for our property. Now we're going to go through, we want to pull in our data from MLS. This is going to be a feature that's going to be released to you come January. Right now, I believe you guys are under the RMLS and COAR MLS that you guys are subscribed to. However, ORF is going to be allowing MLS Connect, MLS Push, which I will explain in one moment, and single sign-on in January. This is going to be a great asset, great feature. It's going to allow you to work a lot quickly in your ZipForm. So when we go through, we have our transactions. The tab we want to look for right now here is Property. Okay, so Property is going to allow us to pull in the MLS criteria from ZipForm, or I'm sorry, from your MLS. Okay, so with MLS Connect, basically, I click here, and you will see with your MLS name, the acronym is yet to be determined. However, you will see your acronym there along with your credentials that you'll receive at that time. And then you'll be able to go through and find the property. So here you can choose which listing type it is, whether it's a residential, lot, commercial, multi-unit, multi-family. And then you're going to choose your MLS listing ID. So let me plug that in here. Oops. And then here, you can also include the property photo here as well. Even though we included it in the initial setup the transaction, you can also pull it in under the include property photo, given that that is going to be provided at that time for you guys. Those details are yet to be determined. So I'm going to click on Find. Once we click Find, I'm going to go ahead and import that in. And we're going to go ahead and click Yes. It's just saying, basically, do you want to replace existing data with imported data? We're going to click on Yes. So now it pulled in all of that information into ZipForm. Easy, right? So now all we need to do is we need to set our dates. Okay, so there's a couple items that are going to be something that you're going to need to address. So we have a listing date. So say the listing date was November 1st. And just bear with me, I'm just going to throw in some dates here. The listing expiration date is at the end of the month. We'll do the closing today. The date of the contract will be today. Offer date will be that. And then we'll do the possession date. We'll do Thanksgiving, right? Good day to move into a house. All right, so we have all of that information in there. So now that I have that in, I'm going to click on Save up here at the left. And that's going to go through and save that information in for me. So if I go to my checklist, which is this tab, the checklist is going to pull in all of my due dates that are due for this month. So you're going to notice this is all part, again, of the Zip TMS part. This is going to give you a calendar view of everything that's due, which is nice to have. All of your urgent tasks, so if I click on urgent tasks, these are all of the items that I need to attend to. So let's say I schedule the closing. That is complete. I would just click on that. And then it's going to just kind of let me go through and make the changes, modifications I need to. Okay, With ZipTMS, we can do a couple of other functions as well. Everything that you see here can be manipulated. So we can manipulate the send contract to lender. Say we did this on a different day. I can go ahead and change it to another day if I wanted to. All of this information is going to also change on your contracts as well. So even the listing expiration date, say we change that. It's going to change on a listing contract. It's going to change that date in there as well. So everything that's changed here is going to change on your ZipForm contracts as well inside ZipForm. So everything's the same and everything's consistent. It's very seamless. So we can also display this in a month, in a week, in a day. And then we can also send this to a recipient, maybe our broker. We can go ahead and say, all right, here's my calendar of events. I got all this stuff going on. Look how busy I am. We can go ahead and send this off to that broker. That works here. Once it goes through, simply is they're going to have the view of the calendar. Here is my information as the agent, my property, and I got a full view of everything that's going on for the month of November. Okay, as you see here, there's some functions you can print, you can save it. So that is just a nice added feature for you. All right, I'm going to go back to my transaction here, and I'm going to open up a transaction I already created. I want you to see a full checklist. So here is, a full view of all the transactions I have and everything that I've added in here. In this area, I have, again, my pre-approval letter. The cover sheet is something I wanted to talk about as well. If I open up my cover sheet, the cover sheet is going to allow you to be able to fill in this information. Everything that you fill in this area is also going to populate on these forms. So if you notice, maybe Brenda, buyer, she is up here as my buyer. If I go to the buy-sell agreement, she's here. Let's say you see something, maybe she wanted to add her middle initial. You can go ahead and do that. So we have Brenda A, buyer. If I go to my cover sheet again, I can go ahead and I'll see the changes are made there and vice versa. So if I make the changes here, it's going to change on these forms as well. So the cover sheet consists of your property information, your buyer, your seller. Just going to scroll through here. You'll see the selling broker information. There is a couple areas where we can add in MLS Connect. So we saw under that property tab, we were able to pull in MLS Connect. If you're on just your cover sheet, you can also pull in MLS Connect, and that's going to be listed here. So again, this is just another way of pulling in that data from your MLS. And I'm going to do that again one more time for you so you got an idea how that works. We're going to find it and import. Okay. So here's all that property information. So you got a fuller view of what it is that's being pulled in. Okay. So that is how the MLS Connect feature works. Now, I mentioned MLS Push. The MLS Push, because I don't have credentials, I won't be able to show you that part. MLS Push is going to allow you to start off in the MLS. The MLS is going to have a button created on their site. It will be a Make Me an Offer button is what we call it. You'll see the Make Me an Offer button, and you'll be able to push that data, all of your listing credentials, all of that data into ZipForm Plus. It's going to automatically open up this cover sheet and have that information filled in for you. So you can either start from your MLS and push the data, hence MLS Push, or MLS Connect, where you start off inside a ZipForm transaction and pull the information in from your MLS. All right? I hope that that clarifies how MLS Connect and MLS Push work. The single sign-on is going to just kind of make everything all cohesive. You will not have to go through and have a number of different usernames and passwords to sign in. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these features. I'm going to go to our buy-sell agreement. Now you'll notice on the left, these are all of my forms I have in my transaction. Again, I can go through, I can pull in forms. I can close that tab, I can open it, and I'm going to choose my buy-sell agreement here and just kind of cover some of these features that we have up here. We have the full screen option. The full screen is going to allow us to view everything as a whole. It's going to remove all of that, all those toolbars there at the top, and you'll be able to go through and fill out your contract as needed. to go back to the default view, we click on full screen again. We can save this, pretty self-explanatory. We can email this form. We can also email multiple forms by doing that. So if I want to email this form, I can do so. I will be able to enter my recipient subject line. I can also choose from my address book as well. So if I click on address, I have the option to send this to anyone in my transaction, as you see here. I can also add in for my address book. So there is an import feature where you're able to import your addresses into ZipForm, or your recipients into your ZipForm account, and that would be all listed here. And then any service providers that you have. Okay. There's an extra feature I want to show you with the email portion, which is going to come in 1 second here. Here we can print. We can print this form. We can print multiple forms, print blank form or print sample form. The sample form, it was just going to print sample across. Pretty self-explanatory there. And then we have transaction information. This is going to be a quick way for you to be able to go through and add all of the recipient's address information into the contract. So what do I mean by that? If I go to buyer 1, I can quickly go through and pull in for my address book once again, and I can go right down the line. So here's my buyer 2, buyer 3. So this is going to help me be able to fill out my document quicker. Again, I can also import from MLS Connect here as well. So this is a third area of where we can pull those your MLS data listing information into ZipForm. Okay, and that's called transaction information. Now we have the fast fill. Fast fill, if I click on that, fast fill is also another quick way to be able to go through and fill out your form. I know a lot of you are in a big hurry and you want to be able to go through and fill out these forms quickly. This allows you to do that. It's going to remove all of that foreign language out of your contracts and allow you to go through and check off what you want to check off, fill in the data that you need to fill in, and so on. So this is a nice way of being able to quickly do that. Again, that's called fast fill. And I can just click on that again, and it's going to take me back to my default, my checkboxes, which I unchecked. So we have save as PDF. So if you want to save this on your hard drive, you can do so. That is available to you. You can also highlight language as well. You can also change the color if you need to. So if there's any language that pertains or that doesn't pertain to your buyer, your seller, you can go through and highlight that. So what we do is we would have to highlight the text area with our mouse first. So you're going to select the area you want to highlight. Oh, for example, we'll just take that, and I can click on highlight. So that's going to highlight that for me. So anything you want to highlight, you're going to select the language first, click highlight. And the same goes for strikeout. So if there's strikeout in any language that you want to strike out, you're going to highlight the area first and strike that information out. To remove all of these changes, we can go ahead and just double click on the areas of the sentence. And that's going to remove the highlighting and the strikeout and so on. And yet there's another area for MLS Connect. So as you see, there's a lot of different areas and ways to add in the MLS Connect language and the data. Again, we stress that you do it on the cover sheet. It is helpful because all that information will populate on all of their forms. But if you don't want to start off in a cover sheet, you don't necessarily need to. And let's say you're on this buy-sell agreement, we allow you to go through and pull in your MLS Connect data in from there as well. Okay? So that would be for MLS Connect. The e-signing we will discuss in one moment. I'm going to click here on more. We have attach a photo. So I'm going to actually open up another document that I have here. So again, these are all of my forms that I have in my transaction. I'm going to go to an addendum. The addendum is a good example. You're probably going to use the attached photo for other areas and other forms. Again, I'm not a real estate professional, so I'm sure you guys will have other means of attaching photos to your documents, but this is a very nice feature we've added recently for our ZipForm veterans. Maybe you didn't know this was here, so hopefully this is a new surprise for you. We can attach a photo. What do I mean by that? Well, if there's something wrong with the house or you want to point something out to maybe the buyer or the seller, we'll say the seller for instance, I want to attach a photo. So I can attach photo, click attach, and I'm going to find one of my photos here real quick. It's going to open up here on my desktop, and we'll just say peeling paint. Maybe the seller needs to fix the peeling paint on their house, okay, before this offer goes through. So click OK, or maybe the seller didn't fix it and they want to point out to the buyer that, hey, this house has some peeling paint. See the photo. You can add some notes in the area wherever you need to and add a photo. I'm going to attach another photo. Now, I want you to pay attention to, this says photo 1, okay? I'm going to add another photo. And we'll do this really cool basement here. This is my basement. I'm just kidding. Click OK. So we're going to go ahead and click the photo 1, and we're going to drop it right under photo 2. Now you notice it's going to be in sequence. So you can change the sequence of these. It makes it easy for you if you have notes here. And is what I mentioned about the email. I'm going to show you how it looks on email. Say you want to email this form out and you want those photos to go with it. All you need to do is just go to email this form. Okay, say we have the recipient information in there. You scroll down all the way to the bottom of this contract. Ta-da! We have the forms. You have the pictures here. So we have the paint on the barn, and then we have the really cool basement. So they can see all of these photos at hand. They can kind of get an idea of what it is that they're looking at, so that way we know what's going on and they can have that visual, because the visuals are very important, as we know, in real estate here. So that's how we add the photos. Okay, so hopefully that was a nice feature and a nice surprise for you. Notes, here we can create a sticky notes. The sticky notes are really just for reminders. If you want to create a new note and just say maybe we need to get some additional photos, it's just kind of a personal reminder. I can go ahead and say, all right, I can put that sticky note anywhere I want. I can go through, I can change some of the features with this sticky note. I can change it just an icon, make it small. I can go through, I can show it in the minimize state, maximize, I can hide it. I can change the color of this if I needed to. It's all time and date stamped as well, so that way you know when you had put that note in there. And then if you want to delete it, simply click on the X and delete it. We also have check spelling. So I know a lot of us are in a hurry and we are very clumsy sometimes when it comes to spelling. It'll allow us to spell check all of the forms that we have inside our transaction. So we can continue with the next form and it will go through and make those changes. And you can click all done and it will go through and allow you to review that document with it all being corrected there. We have the non-applicable fill. So I'm going to actually jump back to my buy-sell agreement so you got an idea what this is. The NA fill. So if there's documents that has some missing information, maybe there's some information that doesn't pertain to your buyer or your seller, you don't want to necessarily leave it blank. We want to fill that information in. So here I can click NA, and it's going to say that any empty fields in the current form will only be filled with the following text. So here we can have NA. To make it look more professional, you can type in not applicable, and then click apply. Once you click apply, it's going to add NA to all of those empty fields. Okay, you can also remove them. Maybe you didn't want to have those added in there. You don't like the way it looks kind of sloppy. We can remove that as well. All right, I'm going to jump to my cover sheet. Now, inside the cover sheet, let's say I do a lot of business, and hopefully you do too, and you're going to have a streaming line of all these wonderful addresses. Some may not like that, some may. This is called our lookup field area, where we can remove all of this information if we wanted to. So how do we do that? Well, all I need to do is click on the lookup field icon here, and I can select which fields I want. So here I have buyer 1, buyer 2. I'm going to just find the street. There's my street. I can go through and clear the fields and save it and close it. Pretty simple, right? So then I go through and click on the street address, and as you notice, there's nothing listed there. It's all cleared out, clean slate, so that way it keeps it clean. But we have that there just in case for those of you that maybe do business in the same area or have dealt with the same seller, buyer. So it's just there for you in case you need it. We also can undo any of our functions and redo any of our functions. So that would be those features. Now, the fun stuff with DocuSign or digital ink, I should say. If you use ZipLogic's digital ink or you use DocuSign, you can go through and fill these documents out. I'm going to show you a little setting here in ZipForm. So if I go to my username, you're going to have a couple of things here. We're going to go to View Profile. Now, if I want to use maybe, let's say, digital ink or DocuSign, I can click on Settings. And I can choose whether I want to use DocuSign or digital ink. Again, if this is something that you would want to purchase, you can do so. But these settings are there in case you want to change, or maybe you have DocuSign, you want to use digital ink, or vice versa. So that will be where you go to do that. So that's just to give you an idea. While we're in here, just a couple other little things here. You can also change some general options as well, and some other features that you'll see in here. You may notice that may not pertain to you. That's okay. You can just leave those alone. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we are going to go back out of here, and we want to say, okay, we want to go ahead and sign a document. So there's a couple places we can go inside of a transaction and sign that specific transaction, or I can click on e-sign, which is right here. Once I click on e-sign, going to ask me to name my submission. So we'll just say the purchase contract here. And we will do a buy-sell agreement. Now, if you notice here, I have these little empty boxes. This is what you're going to use to check off which document you want to send via digital ink. And then we can also choose which pages as well. So maybe it's just the last 2 pages we want to send and not the whole document. So we can go ahead and select just the 2 pages. Now, we can also go through and we can pull in a document. So maybe there is, let's say, we'll say an inspection report, for example. Maybe I want to pull in an inspection report. Of course, the documents you're pulling in are PDF documents, okay? So any other documents won't necessarily work. PDF documents is what you're going to be able to pull in. We'll click OK. So now we have our documents to sign. We have a buy-sell agreement. We have a home inspection report. Now, I can also change the sequence in these as well. Maybe I want the home inspection report signed first. So all I need to do is just grab it, drag and drop it. Let's try this way. Drag and drop those items, and you will be able to have this sent off to your recipient in the order you see them here. Okay, so again, I'm just grabbing, dragging, and dropping, and changing that sequence. All right, so we're going to click on Next. We have everything checked off. Here we have our transaction parties right up here at the top. These are all of our parties in our transaction. So say I want to do my buyer. So we're going to do, we'll do Brenda here, we'll do Sam, and we'll just do Bill too. So we have 2 buyers and we have our seller. I'm going to go ahead and click on Done, but I can also, again, choose from address book, service providers, any new recipients if I want. So here we have the role, first name, middle name, last name, email, pretty self-explanatory, and then click Done. So now we see our recipients, okay? A couple things to note. You're going to see order here. This is the order the invitation to that recipient is going to be sent. So here I have buyer 1, then I have seller 1, then I have buyer 2. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, that's definitely not right. I want buyer 1 to have this first, then I want buyer 2 to have it. So I can go ahead again and change the sequence. I can go ahead and change the roles. Maybe buyer 1 and buyer 2, maybe they don't care who signs the document first. It's basically first come, first serve. I can say, all right, I can go ahead and place buyer 2 right on top of buyer 1. You're going to see they're both blue. When they're both blue, that means they're going to sign at the same time. So here I have buyer 1 and buyer 2 signing at the same time, and then seller 1. You can also go through and shuffle those around how you need to. That's fine. So here I have our role. Here's the name, the email address. You can carbon copy any one you wish. We have 2 authentications, 2 identity verification methods you can choose from. Keep in mind these are an option to you. There is a $5 identification verification fee. This is per transaction. So Again, this is an option. It's not something you need to purchase. The text message authentication is going to allow you to plug in the recipient's phone number. Maybe it's the buyer. Maybe you don't know the buyer. Maybe you're not familiar with who they are, or maybe they work overseas. You haven't really talked to them. I don't know. Some of the situations out there I've heard are different. So, but you want to make sure that that buyer is the one receiving this document. So we can plug in the phone number. Once we plug in that phone number, the buyer is going to receive a text message with a code. Once he goes through and opens up the document to sign, it's going to ask him to enter the code he received via text message. And he'll be able to plug that in, and it will unlock the document for him to go through and complete the signing process. So that's the text message authentication. Verify ID is something similar. The Verify ID is going to basically ask a series of different questions. If you know those questions that are asked maybe when we do a credit report for ourselves, it's going to ask you where you lived 2,500 years ago. You don't remember the addresses, but something does look familiar, then those are the kind of questions that you're going to see. So that's what is going to be asked of you for the Verify ID verification authentication there. Okay. We can also go through and say our buyer 2 pulls out, maybe they don't want to sign it. They just said, okay, you know what, Brenda, I want you to go ahead and just sign this document. I don't need to sign it. I trust you. Then he's going to say, okay, the agent, myself, I can go ahead and delete them. Okay. I can also edit any information as well. So maybe the email address changed, maybe there's a middle name related to this. Whatever the case is, you can go through and make changes there as well. You're also going to notice a plus sign here. This is to add any additional signers. Again, here's another area for the CC list. This just allows you to pull in from the address book or enter any additional addresses here as you need to. And then time zone, this is going to be set for you by default, but maybe you're in beautiful Hawaii, soaking up the sun. You're pretty close, well, you're on the west side, so we're in Michigan here, so it's a little cold, so I think about Hawaii a lot. But so I can choose from Hawaii if I wanted to, or any other area I'm in. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and click Next. Once I click Next, it's going to take me right into ZipForm Digital Ink, ZipLogix Digital Ink, and it's going to open up in the same browser. It's not going to take me to another window where I have to go through and shuffle between the pages. It's going to allow me to go through and open right up into that area. So now what we're looking at here is our digital ink, how we go through and sign these documents. Now what's nice about many of our forms is everything is pre-tagged. Me as an agent, I don't have to go through and find the signature. As I was scrolling down here, everything is pre-tagged for me. So what I mean by that is, if you notice, I have the signatures. There's the buyer, there's the seller initials. If there's another set of initials, all you need to do is just drag and drop in the area that you need to. You can also allow for text boxes if there's any language you want. Check boxes, we notice some check boxes up here. So say I want Brenda to go through and check off some of the items. She can go ahead and do so. Oops, sorry about that. And this box also moves too. So you'll notice it does get it's a little large, but we can move that around if we need to. We have our check boxes. They can also, agents can also set this up to acknowledge or agree. Recipients can just read it and say, all right, I've read this, this is good to go. So those are just some other functionalities there just to make it a little easier for your recipient to be able to review the document that you had done for them. Okay. So what's nice about the rest of this is, again, everything is pre-tagged for us. I can go through and choose the home inspection report. Because it's a PDF document, nothing's pre-tagged for us. Maybe I want to have Brenda initial it. So I'm going to let her initial this. That way she knows that her as the buyer, she had this done. And that's going to be how you do that. So here we have just a box for the initials. We can move it around as we need to. And then we can go ahead and click Send. Here it's going to say whenever you're ready to start the signing process, click Send. So we're going to go ahead and click Send. You can change the title if you need to. We just suggest to leave it consistent with the transaction name so you don't get confused. And then any other email message you want to add. Okay, so once we send this off, it's going to send email invitations to our buyer and our seller. So we'll wait for that email address to come in, or that email. And it's going to take you right back to the area for ZipLogix Digital Inc. Here is just basically the running information that's going on and taking place currently. Our party information, here's the transaction status, so the action is required. And then we can also view, download these documents as well. I'm going to go into my email here and grab my email. So the email the buyer is going to see. So she's going to say, okay, I have documents that are ready to view. I can click this. I'm going to tell her to log in to Digital Inc. So she's going to click on this URL. And once she clicks on the URL, she's going to go ahead and accept that and click next. And she's going to go ahead and create a signing password. The signing password can be anything 6 to 12 characters. So we'll just go ahead and plug that in. And this is also going to allow her to be able to go in and retrieve any of her documents as she needs to. We can also choose our signature font. We can go ahead and sign. Of course, I'm on my laptop, so it's a little messy. So we will just play it safe here and choose our font. A lot nicer looking there. All right, so we're going to go ahead and click on to view and sign. And here it's just telling her just to basic instructions. Just click on go if she wants to go ahead and finish signing or let her review it. Let's click go. She's going to add her initials. And here's her signature to sign. By default, it's going to automatically have the sign date, so it's very easy on her end. That's it. She just has to go through, click through each area that it takes her to automatically. I'm not doing anything. The ZipLogix Digital Link actually takes them there. And then finish. Once they finish the documents, it's going to go to the next recipient, which is Sam. So it's going to let them know, say, hey, the next party is Sam, and he's been notified. So we're going to go back in our email, in our inbox here. And once this goes through, she's going to receive an email that's going to state that she had signed the document. A little slow here. Her documents are ready to view. Thank you for submitting. So here's Sam. We're going to follow the same steps as Sam and accept. Click next. Signing password. He's going to do the same exact functions as Brenda did. We'll choose the signature there. And again, he's going to click go. And he's going to click, 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 click. And if you forget a signature, it's going to also let you know as well. So they can go through and do that. Okay, I had already gone through and did some of these signatures as well, so there's not much that he would need to do. And he's going to receive that same email as well. Once those documents are completed, they'll both receive the PDF versions of the document. Everyone will be able to see how that document works. Let me go through that. There we go. And there we have it. So we will be able to go through and complete those as is. So once that's completed, I'll just show you exactly what that looks like. When the documents are done, we can go ahead. I'll close this. And I'm actually going to just jump to one thing here so you can see what happens. Once those documents are signed, what happens is a folder is created, which is called our ZipVault folder. ZipVault is going to store any of those documents inside a folder that allows you to be able to view them. So let me see here. We have one folder. Let me just give me one quick second here. Okay, so as an example, I have the digital signatures. I just wanted to show you. I was having an issue there, but the folder will be automatically created, and those digital ink documents will be added into my folder for me. So everything is there for me when I need it. So that is how the ZipLogix Digital Ink works, along with ZipVault, and how those are stored inside your transaction. So it keeps everything simple, and everything is there for you. Okay, so we talked about ZipLogix Digital Ink. It's a great feature. Here we can go through and add additional documents for using Zip Vault. I can go through and I can create maybe a folder. Say I want to add a folder for some pictures. So I can go ahead and create a folder and click OK. And again, I can go through and add in any pictures I need to. So I can browse for a file. I can even create a placeholder again. So we're going to go ahead and maybe just grab a couple of pictures. Let's see here. We'll use some blueprints. We'll use some nice houses here. So here we have a water line. Click Open. Click OK. And then here it's going to allow me to pull in those photos. So this will be a JPEG folder or a JPEG document. And then we can also, again, pull in any other Word documents, locked PDF documents as well. Okay, so that is our pictures folder. If there's any other areas, maybe additional documents folder you want to add, we can go ahead and create a documents folder for any special documents you want. So I can click on Documents, and I can just simply drag and drop these documents here as well. All right. So we talked about all the features within ZipForm Plus as far as being able to go through and use all of these tools here, and just some of the other options that you have available to you. Part of Zip TMS is the tasks. We talked about how that calendar view has all of the tasks that we have due for that specific transaction. If I click on tasks up here, this is going to tell me all of the tasks I have for all of my transactions. So here I have 28 tasks that are due. I'm a busy girl and I am very late on all of my tasks. So we have a lot of different things that we can do to access tasks and manipulate dates such as that, as I explained in ZipForm with Zip TMS. All right. And then we have some other features inside here for contacts. Here we can go ahead and we can add additional contacts in this area. So if you're working with other parties, this is where you're going to go through and create those contacts by creating the category, whether they're the seller, the buyer, the agent. You can fill that information. You can add a photo of that contact, which is nice. Administration, I am in a brokerage account here. I can go through and I can review my agent list as a broker. Agents would be able to go through and take care of all of their other functions inside of their account under View Profile, which we touched on earlier. We can go through and create a signature line. So here you'll be able to go ahead and add your signature. And for settings, for libraries, you can also review the libraries you have available to you. So if I want to go through and maybe manage my libraries, I can click on Manage. And I can go ahead and I can shuffle these around, check off which ones I need to by clicking on Organize. And I can go through and do that, so I can have those in order of the way they are sequenced inside ZipForm. So that would be kind of a way to go through and do that. Those are all the products that are available to me. So you'll see that if you're ever wondering inside your account what items you have, you can review that information there. Okay. We have our partner site here. This tells us all of the partners that we partnership with. So this is just a way of knowing what we do outside of ZipForm, Zip TMS, Digital Ink. This is Synex. This is our digital ink platform, also a top producer and other options as well. And then we have help. This is another area for help. We have our training and education, how-to videos. The how-to videos are going to just take us right through our ZipLogic's YouTube training site. So this is going to give us all of the areas where we need to go to learn how to do some of the things that we learned about today. And that can be found on YouTube. So you could simply just type in ziplogics.youtube or ziplogics YouTube, and it'll pull up our YouTube channel here. Okay, so that will give you an array of different areas for training purposes. Okay. All right, just going through, I believe pretty much that covers a lot of other items that we have learned about. There is one thing I do want to show you. inside a transaction, everything that we did today is going to be saved in a history tab. The history tab is going to give you all of the documents, everything that you see that you've done in the duration of your transaction. So here we have my documents. I have added a basement water line picture. I've added pictures here. I sent a purchase contract. So here I can actually go through and I can check the status of that contract as well by clicking on check status. And then you're going to click on check status here as well. I was having an issue with my internet here earlier, so you'll probably see one that says pending or awaiting authentication. So here we have completed, which Brenda went ahead and did, and this one is still required. Maybe he didn't sign it or didn't see it. You can kind of give him a little push and email him again and just say, hey, hello, you need to sign this contract. Okay, so that is how we find where the status is located inside our history feature. We can also go through and review any view changes for anything that has been done inside ZipForm. Again, we have all these other array of tabs. So we have documents. Here's our parties. Again, these are all the parties that we are able to work with. And then again, our property. Okay, again, we can add our photo. Again, here's our checklist. The checklist is going to allow us to be able to add a new checklist if we need to. Again, our checklists are pulled in from our templates. Again, I stress the templates because that's a very nice feature. It allows you to quickly go through and create a transaction without having to find all the forms that you need to have in your transaction. Okay, and then again, the history folder or the history file tab. So that covers ZipForm, ZipForm Plus. And I hope that ZipForm was able to, we were able to kind of guide you through a little bit how to use ZipForm. Please refer to the ZipForm Plus beginning handout that you had received. That will allow you to go through and kind of use that as a guide and then be able to go through and work on ZipForm and be able to learn how to use it at your fullest advantage. For any questions, I hope you guys were able to get your questions answered by our lovely helper, Ashley. And for any other questions, feel free to reach out to Orif, or if you would like, I will actually go through for any help desk questions. I'm going to kind of give you a little area here for our training. We have support.ziplogics.com. And then here are some support numbers. So here we have our training on demand link, our online training that we have available, which are just some pre-recorded. I know Orif has been great with posting this on their website as well in the training areas along there. And then any other questions you have, we are happy to help. So I hope you guys got a lot out of this training. Again, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And I appreciate your time and have fun playing with ZipForm. Thank you very much, and you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.